70 for dead, 3 countries, 1 cult, the Order of the Solar Temple. It left a trail of destruction that still baffles experts today. Founded by Joseph D.M. Ambro, a former jeweler, and Luc Chouret, a homeopathic doctor. I'm not homophobic. That's not what I meant to say. A homeopathic doctor. This wasn't your typical Doomsday cult, though. They targeted the elite, lawyers, doctors, politicians. The people you would least expect to fall for such extreme beliefs, ignoring Scientology, of course. We'll talk about that at some point on this channel, I'm sure. So, how did these intelligent individuals end up participating in a mass transit to Sirius? Today we will be breaking down the rise and fall of the Order of the Solar Temple, exposing the manipulation tactics that turned ordinary people into devoted cultists, and what horrors became of them. Crime, conspiracy, serial killers, cults, and murder. All things that I love to consume. And I know you do too. You sweet little, but unnosed baby boy. And also, you're an intellectual, sweet, beautiful-minded freak. But today we are talking about just that, the Order of the Solar Temple. A very disturbing cult. I feel like not as many people know about this one. There are freaking magic ethereal kids in this cult. Okay, it's gonna get weird as freak. So without further ado, let's unbuckle our seatbelts, go Mach 5 down the highway, slam on the brakes, and jump through this windshield into this crazy cult together. The jeweler and the doctor. And of course, we're gonna start out with who the heck is running this shit, and that is the dually and the doctor. Joseph D.M. Ambro. It's a very scary name for me. I mean, I know what he did, so maybe that's why it's scary. But anyway, Joseph D.M. Ambro was always a cult leader. They never are. Born in 1924 in Pont Saint-Esprit in France, I will say a lot of things wrong, forgive me. He started out as a regular Joe, fixing watches and selling jewelry. But this guy had a taste for the weird. In 1956, he joined Amorc, the ancient and mystical Order of the Rose A Crucis, or Crucis. There's a couple ways to say it. Sounds like a lot of fun to me. To be honest, sounds like something I would join when I'm like 14. Instead of Dungeons and Dragons, it was the ancient and mystical Order of the Rosicrucians. Sounds badass anyway. This group was founded on the belief of spiritual development, including mysticism, alchemy, and more. This is sounding more and more awesome as I go, but I promise you it's not. However, this was only just the beginning of D.M. Ambro's journey into the world of the strange. Meanwhile, across the globe, Luc Chouret was born in 1947 in Belgian Congo, and this dude became a doctor, graduating in 1974. But regular medicine for him was not enough. He got into homeopathy, which is basically just expensive water if you ask most scientists. We don't need to get into it, but people loved it, and Chouret became a big shot speaker on alternative medicine and new age crap in French-speaking Europe. Chouret really was quite convinced that he had a mission to fulfill, that he was like a kind of representative of the Templar Order into the profane world. But anyway, here's where things get interesting. In 1982, these two weirdos met when Chouret joined D.M. Ambro's Golden Way Foundation, and it was like a match made in cult heaven, if there is such a thing. They both basically just had a hard-on for cult and esoteric teachings, and they hit it off immediately. D.M. Ambro, now pushing 60 at this point, had been running the Golden Way Foundation in Geneva, attracting all sorts of people who thought crystals could cure cancer and that aliens built the pyramids and whatnot, which I'm not opposed to that theory. I'm gonna be honest. Not the crystals thing, but the aliens thing. I just don't know how you explain it otherwise. It was the perfect combo though, the behind-the-scenes mastermind and the charming frontman. And these two didn't waste any time. In 1984, they officially founded the Order of the Solar Temple, which to be fair is a badass name. And their logo is kind of tight, I'm not gonna lie. The first thing I said when I saw it was like, it's pretty sweet, I'm not gonna lie. But they're pieces of shit, so that's the only thing I'm gonna give them. They would kick off the Order of the Solar Temple with a ceremony in Geneva where they swore allegiance to a once-and-future supreme secret master of the temple. DM Ambro took on the role of the puppet master, pulling the strings from behind the curtain like the Wizard of Oz, and Drore, with his smooth-talking ways, became the face of the organization. So DM Ambro was behind the curtain and Drore was the frontman, if you will. Drore was out there giving lectures, recruiting members, and spreading their philosophy. And oh boy, did people eat it the fuck up. Drore was especially successful in Quebec, where he managed to rope in executives and managers from Hydro-Quebec. And I don't understand why all these cults that I talk about, they're all connected to Quebec. What the hell's going on up there? Get it together, Quebec. I know it's not all of you, Quebecier, but my Lord Dombus' turn. But anyway, high-level professionals were falling for his spell, and the Order of the Solar Temple was growing and pulling in members from various esoteric groups, including Joire's own Amenta and Arcadia clubs. So there you have it, a former jeweler and a homeopathic doctor. Still sounds wrong, both with a taste for the bizarre joining forces to create what would become one of the most notorious cults of the 20th century. Cosmic children and nightly dreams. But this was just the beginning, unfortunately, and the Order of the Solar Temple was about to take its followers on a wild ride, to say the least. And trust me, it does not end well. So let's get into the Cosmic Child and nightly dreams. Yes, you heard what I said. So you might think a cult mixing Knights Templar lore with UFO beliefs would be too ridiculous to gain followers. But the Order of the Solar Temple's teachings were about to get even weirder. And so, how did they convince educated professionals that a toddler was the Cosmic Messiah? Let that sink in. Cosmic Messiah. The OTS belief system was a bizarre cocktail of Neo-Templar ideas and New Age concepts. On the surface, they preached love, light, and spiritual elevation, but behind closed doors, it was all apocalypse and transit to other planets, as most cults are. I mean, it's always like the front-facing looks all good and everything, like we just talked about the Fledzor. You know, children of God and everything. If people come to visit, it looks fine from the outside, kind of, but in reality, it's just shit. But DM Ambro claimed that OTS was preparing for a new age ushered in by cosmic children, special beings with superpowers, little like Incredibles children, fucking running around, cosmic powers and whatnot, being size and everything. And his daughter, Emmanuelle, born in 1982, was the star of this cosmic show. Naturally. Of course, it had to be his daughter. And he told members she was the cosmic child and the embodiment of the cosmic Christ. Like they're mixing the Bible with Star Wars and putting it together. So, how did he explain her conception? This is awesome and crazy. It's crazy. Not through normal means, of course. It could not be through normal intercourse and whatnot. According to DM Ambro, Emmanuelle was conceived through cosmic intercourse. Everything's gotta be cosmic with this guy, with a ghost-like master. So I don't know if it was a woman or a man or just a ghost, I'm not sure. But the Knights Templar obsession ran deep in the OTS, and it's literally just the plot from Star Wars, which also copies the story of Jesus. So it's just plagiarism all around. And it's real, so it's not fun. You know, if it was fiction, it'd be fun. But it's not. They claim direct lineage from the medieval Templars, saying secret masters sent them esoteric messages. And these weren't your average weekend LARPers. As you know, if you don't know what LARPers is, it's right here on screen, right? Here on screen, right? Or you can show them a video of them. These people took the stuff extremely seriously. And their rituals were elaborate affairs, invoking a whole hierarchy of ascended masters. He would say to us, do you realize that we are the only people on the planet to be seeing these things? That throughout history there have been great souls, great saints, and they have never had a sign, and we have flashes, signs. We have the blood of Christ. These ceremonies were designed to convince members that they had special roles in the coming of the new age, and it was all part of a plan to keep people hooked into the OTS's unique mission, which was that they were reincarnated saints. And you would go through this ritual where you would be given a cross, you would be sworn in as a member, and you would also swear not to reveal any of the goings-on inside this group, because everything was kept extremely secretive. But here's where it gets really dark. While they talked about love and enlightenment in public, the private teachings were very doom and gloom. They pushed ideas about persecution and the impending apocalypse, creating a sense of urgency among members. And we see this with every cult that I've talked about, and pretty much every cult in general. Whether it's Jim Jones, or the Order of the Solar Temple, or Children of God. Like, all these cults always need a fear-mongering aspect to keep people with them, so they push the same rhetoric. The contrast between the OTS's public face and its inner teachings was stark. On one hand, you had Luke Schwartz giving lectures about alternative medicine and spiritual growth, and on the other hand, you had Joseph D.M. Ambrose spinning tales about cosmic children at the end of the world, which sounds cooler. Kidding. But this mix of Knights Templar mythology, New Age concepts, and apocalyptic beliefs created a potent brew of cults too. So the OTS managed to create a belief system that was both attractive and terrifying, and this combination would prove deadly effective in controlling its members. But beliefs alone don't explain what was to come. The Order of the Solar Temple was about to take a very dark turn, and its members were along for the ride whether they knew it or not. And the stage was set for tragedy with DM Ambrose and Schwartz holding all the strings. And trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next time. The Peak and the Pyramid Scheme. So picture this. It's 1989 and Joseph DM Ambrose is living large. First-class travel, multiple luxury homes, and a growing bank account fueled by devoted followers. It's a lot like some other religions I know. They just love to use the church's money. But here's the kicker. The Order of the Solar Temple hit its peak membership of 442 across 6 countries, and the seeds of its destruction were already taking root. So how did it all unravel so quickly? Well, let's break it down. The OTS had spread its tentacles across Europe and North America. We're talking 90 members in Switzerland, 187 in France, 43 in Martinique, and 10 in Spain. Itexas in Canada, mostly in Quebec of course, and 16 in good old USA. Not too shabby for a cult that believe in cosmic children and Knight Templar ghosts, right? But how did they keep all these people in line? Well, DM Ambrose and Schwartz weren't idiots. They set up these 3-tiered systems. And at the bottom you had the Amena Club, and this was just like entry-level stuff where they would spew their philosophies and try to find the spiritual elite, and only a select few would move up to the next level. And if you were lucky or unlucky, depending on how you look at it, you'd get bumped up to the Arcadial level. And this is where things got more, let's say, advanced. They would prep you for the ultimate initiation into the OTS. But the real prize, the International Knighthood Organization. Again, they got cool names. Like, I kind of get why people went into this cause. They're like, I get to be a knight. What? And there's cosmic children and fucking wizards and shit. Sounds awesome. And this was the top tier, the VIP, special publications, fancy editiones, the whole 9 yards. Now, while all the spiritual mumbo-jumbo was going on, DM Ambrose was living it up. And former members kind of spilled the beans, saying he was using the group's funds to support his opulent lifestyle. And where was all the money coming from? The members. DM Ambrose and Schwartz were encouraging their followers to make significant financial contributions to the group, and they even had plans to build health centers in Europe and Canada. Guess who's footing the bill for that? And in Quebec, Schwartz was on a roll. His motivational speaking gigs were attracting executives and managers like flies to honey. I would have become involved with just about anything to stay with Dr. Rive. Schwartz, and I felt that if I was able to get closer to him, or at least to stay within the group, that at some point I would probably gain more knowledge. I would probably have access to revelations, to wonderful things, and even maybe at one point to be in contact with either entities or extraterrestrials. And these were your average Joe Schmo-s. These are high-level professionals falling for this stuff. So it's like, I really would have loved to be in that time and listen to Schwartz speaking and see if it fall for it, cause I'm kind, I'm an idiot, so maybe I'm so dumb that I wouldn't fall for it. But here's the thing about building your empire on a foundation of bullshit. It is bound to crumble eventually. And as the money rolled in and the membership swelled, cracks were starting to form. People were beginning to ask questions. Where was all the cash going? Why did DM Ambro need such a fancy house? Or sorry, fancy houses? And was this supposed to be about spiritual enlightenment, not material wealth? So, the OTS had built a complex web of manipulation using its steered structure to keep members always striving for the next level of enlightenment. It flatters your ego to be part of a group that designs itself as an elite, that are the chosen ones. How can you not feel good about it? I actually believed that I was superior to most other people on this planet. That I had been chosen, and I would start considering other people as being less than what I was. But as we know, the higher you climb, the harder you fall. And oh boy, was the Order of the Solar Temple about to take a hell of a tumble. Special effects and diapers. His own flesh and blood was about to pull back the curtain on Daddy's little magic show. And let me tell you, what LEDM Ambro discovered in the early 1990 seconds made David Copperfield look like a birthday party magician. So Ellie, Joseph DM Ambro's son, stumbled upon a shocking truth. Those Spiritual Visions members were experiencing work completely fake. They were as real as a $3 bill. And it turns out dear old Dad was using special effects and holograms to fake the whole thing. And this was just some minor fib. We're talking about the foundation of the entire cult being built on smoke and mirrors, like literally. So when Ellie spilled the beans, about 15 members decided that they were going to get the hell out of Dodge. However, some folks were so deep in the Kool-Aid, if you will, that they refused to believe any of it. So they stuck around, probably thinking Ellie was just jealous of his dad's sweet hologram setup. I don't know. But the special effects weren't the only thing raising eyebrows. Members started noticing that while they were pinching pennies for the cause, DM Ambro was living it up like a rock star. And in 1994, 2 members got fed up and wrote a letter calling out DM Ambro shenanigans, and they weren't pulling any punches, saying his fraudulent actions had, quote-unquote, destroyed the fraternity built by the members. Ooh, darn. But DM Ambro wasn't about to take this criticism lying down. He went full dictator mode, demanding absolute obedience from the remaining members. And anyone who dared question his divine wisdom got the stink eye, to say the least time. So the one Scozy cult started feeling more like a pressure cooker at this point. And as the walls closed in, DM Ambro's paranoia went into overdrive, and he started seeing enemies everywhere. So the guy who once claimed to chat with the Cosmic Master was now jumping at shadows. And the Order of the Solar Temple was transforming from a wacky new age group into something much, much darker. And that whole transit idea was about to take a whole new sinister meaning. But even as things got weird, a lot of the members just clung to their beliefs, and maybe they thought that if they believed hard enough, those holograms would turn real. Just your typical Tuesday in cult land. The baby Antitrust. Imagine being so insecure in your leadership that you see the Antitrust in a newborn. Yeah, and did I mention this supposed embodiment of evil was named Christopher Emmanuel? So in 1994, Tony and Nikki Dutoit, members of the Order of the Solar Temple, welcomed their son Christopher Emmanuel into the world. DM Ambro thought he was the Antitrust, because this innocent baby's arrival would start a chain reaction that would start to expose how far off the deep end Joseph DM Ambro had gone. DM Ambro had a thing about the name Emmanuel. He'd already claimed this for his own daughter, Emmanuel, born in 1982, and HED been parading her around as some sort of cosmic child, if you remember, and the living embodiment of the cosmic Christ as you do. Just classic mom with a new baby, you know? So when the Do-Toots had the audacity to name their kid the same name, which is an extremely popular name, Emmanuel, DM Ambro lost his fucking shit. But here's where it gets really messed up. DM Ambro, the guy seeing evil babies everywhere, was dealing with his own embarrassing health issues. The early 1990 seconds were not kind to him, to say the least, because he had to now start wearing adult diapers. Talk about a fall from grace for a so-called spiritual leader. HES an asshole, so I'm gonna make fun of him. So let's talk about these cosmic children, the OTS were just obsessed with. DM Ambro had convinced his followers that these special kids were destined to play a big role in the coming New Age, and his daughter Emmanuel was supposed to be the star of the cosmic show, the star of the play. But now here comes little Christopher Emmanuel, coming to steal her thunder. And DM Ambro's reaction. He straight up declared this innocent baby the Antitrust. A grown man in diapers called a newborn baby the embodiment of evil. What a piece of shit. But his health was failing and his authority was being questioned, and now he felt challenged by a baby's name. So this guy was just losing his shit, and it was a perfect storm of crazy. The due to it's probably had no idea what they were walking into when they named their son Emmanuel, or Emmanuel, however you want to say it. They were just regular members of the OTS, not trying to start any cosmic drama. But in DM Ambro's mind, they committed an unforgivable sin, or sin that he completely made up, more like it. And this moment would mark a turning point for the OTS, and DM Ambro's declaration about Christopher Emmanuel ramped up the apocalyptic rhetoric within the group. And the us versus them mentality went into overdrive, with DM Ambro positioning himself and his loyal followers against a world he saw as increasingly hostile. The fate of the Detroit family hung in the balance and, spoiler alert, it didn't end well at all. Transit to Sirius. So, while DM Ambro was busy labeling babies as the Antitrust, he was also cooking up an even crazier idea. In the early 1990s, he started pushing the concept of transit to his followers. And at first it sounded pretty harmless, just some metaphorical mumbo-jumbo about changing consciousness. But oh boy, did it take a dark turn. DM Ambro, probably feeling the heat from all the drama, started ramping up the apocalyptic rhetoric, like I said, and he convinced his followers that the world was going to shit and that they needed to prepare for departure, that this wasn't your average doomsday prepper. DM Ambro told them that they were going to literally travel to another planet. Guys, Elon Musk. And according to the research, DM Ambro described this transit as, quote-unquote, a passage across a mirror or travel in a spaceship. It sounded like a bad sci-fi movie, but people bought it nonetheless. And like I said before, these aren't just some random lost hippies from the 60 seconds or something. These were lawyers, doctors, and highly educated professionals that fell for this crap. And the OTS's beliefs were heavily influenced by a guy named Jacques Breyer, and he had all these ideas about the end of Christianity, throwing out dates like 1999, 2147, or 2666 as the big finale. And DM Ambro and Juare took this apocalyptic nonsense and mixed it with some new age fears about the environment going to hell and men going to hell. And the result was a belief that the world was doomed and only the OTS members would survive. But here's where it gets even more messed up. DM Ambro's paranoia went through the roof at this point, and in his writings he claimed, quote-unquote, all the polices in the world are focused on us, and that their file was the hottest on the planet. This guy seriously thought he was the main character in some global conspiracy, and as the pressure mounted, the idea of transit started to look less like a metaphor and more like a euphemism for suicide. Members were told to be on 24-hour alert for a meeting to accomplish this transit. It wasn't a choice anymore. It was framed as necessary for their survival. And external pressures like police investigations only fed into DM Ambro's persecution complex. He used these real-world threats to reinforce the idea that they needed to escape to another world. So he was just using anything the world threw at him as a means to exit this world with his cult. So he didn't have to deal with his shit that was in his fucking... I think the people who claim that DM Ambro was a con man are right. I think that the people who claim that DM Ambro was convinced about his spiritual message are right too. DM Ambro was just a complex personality, actually a kind of schizophrenic and disturbed personality. The terrible consequence of it is that it is a total loss of reality, and the dream world elaborated was shared with several people who more and more entered into his delusions. But planning a mass transit isn't exactly straightforward, and DM Ambro and Juare were busy making preparations, and they weren't subtle about it at all. In a conversation recorded by police, they even talked about making their transit more spectacular than the Waco tragedy. So they were like looking at other cults and seeing how they could one-up them, like Seikos, as if they weren't enough. So a bunch of smart, educated, successful people were convinced that they were about to go on a cosmic road trip when they're really being led to their deaths. Gun smuggling and competition. So you might think that planning a mass transit to another planet was the craziest thing the Order of the Solar Temple could do. But on March 8th, 1993, they took it to a whole level of insanity. What happened that day would set the stage for one of the most shocking cult tragedies in history. And on that fateful day in Quebec, two OTS members, Jean-Pierre Vinitin and Herman Delorme, decided it would be a great idea to try and buy some illegal guns. Not just any guns, mind you, but 3 semi-automatic weapons with silencers. Because nothing says peaceful spiritual group like silenced firearms. Am I right? And the cops nabbed Vinitin Delorme faster than you could say cosmic transit. But wait, there's more. Our boy Luc Jouret, the charismatic frontman of the Cosmic Shit Show, was also implicated in this arms deal. And he was just chilling in Europe at the time, probably sipping on really expensive water called homeopathic medicine. And now you think getting caught trying to buy illegal weapons would be, a wake-up call to these folks. But no, DM Ambro took this as a sign that they were being persecuted. This whole fiasco kicked DM Ambro's paranoia into overdrive even more, and the media had a field day with this story, labeling the OTS as a cult of the end of the world. I mean, they weren't wrong, but still. And then, just adding fuel to the dumpster fire, this is when the Waco siege happened, which was another cult tragedy in Texas. I'll probably do a deep dive on it at some point. So DM Ambro and Jouret were watching that shit show go down, and you think they'd be thinking, yeah, we should chill out a little bit. We should take a step back. No, now they decided to just make it a competition. And in a conversation that was later recorded by police, Jouret winned that, quote-unquote, Waco beat us to the punch tour. They took the spotlight from their cult. What the fuck is going on? DM Ambro, not to be outdone, replied that it would have been better if they had executed their plans 6 months earlier. He even bragged that their event would be more spectacular. The arrest, the media frenzy, and the Waco incident all combined just to create a perfect storm of paranoia and urgency within the OTS at this point. And DM Ambro and Jouret were now more determined than ever to carry out their insane plan. The first transit, October 1994. So in October 1994, he got his wish. The events that unfolded over those few days would redefine the meaning of transit from a journey through space to a one-way ticket to oblivion. And trust me, the destination was far from heavenly. It all started on October 4th, 1994, in Morin Heights, Quebec. The police would respond to a fire and found two charred bodies. And turns out these weren't just any victims. They were Colette Rochetin, Gary Genoudi, and they'd been murdered days before the fire was set. But this was just the beginning. In the same cottage, hidden away in a closet, the cops found something even more horrifying, and those were the bodies of Tony Dutoit and his wife, Susan Robinson, and their baby son, Christopher Emmanuel the Enchantress, as DM Ambro claimed. On the night of October 4th, fires broke out in CRYN Granges sur Salvan. I said those wrong. It is what it is, Switzerland. And when the smoke cleared, the body count was staggering, 23 bodies in CRYN 25 in Granges sur Salvan. And many of those people had taken sedatives before being shot or poisoned. And in CRY, the scene was like something out of a twisted ritual. The bodies were arranged in a circle, like some messed up version of King Arthur's round table. And the cops found 65 bullets in the bodies, a bit overkill, if you ask me. Now some of these deaths were straight up murders, but others the cops would call suicides. But how do you classify death when someone's been brainwashed into thinking they're going on a space vacation? It's not exactly a voluntary trip when you've been fed lies and fear for years. So when the dust settled, the body count was 53, 5 in Quebec and 48 in Switzerland. And DM Ambro and his pals didn't discriminate. They used knives, guns, poison, whatever it took to complete the transit. And during the first transit, DM Ambro and Jouret would also be among those dead bodies. and the media were reporting on this insane cult and what had happened. It's not every day a bunch of seemingly normal people, successful people, decide to check out en masse because some guy in diapers told them to. The fires were discovered into Swiss villages. In the village of Sirius, police found a burnt-out farmhouse. Inside lay the bodies of 23 people. The public was shocked, horrified, and probably a little bit fascinated too, as we do get fascinated with these crazy events. And the Swiss cops and judges dug into this mess for months, and their conclusion was that this wasn't just some random tragedy. It was a result of years of manipulation and some seriously messed up theology. And DM Ambro and Joire had managed to convince intelligent people that death was just a quick pit stop on the way to Sirius. Postmortem P are in the second transit, but this was the end of it. Some of the survivors believed in the OTS's mission after all this death and destruction. There were still people who thought, yeah, this seems pretty legit. The Order of the Solar Temple had one last trick up their sleeve, a PR campaign from beyond the grave. DM Amber wasn't about to let a little thing like death stop him from controlling the narrative. After the bodies were found and the fires put out, investigators discovered a treasure trove of tapes and documents left behind by the OTS. And these weren't just any old papers. They were carefully prepared statements on videos, ready to be sent out to the world. And DM Amber had planned this whole thing down to the last detail, including his costumes, messages. And in a letter addressed to the French Minister of the Interior, he straight up accused the government of trying to destroy the OTS. His exact words were, "We accuse you of having attempted to deliberately destroy our order for reasons of state." So, the guy was just blaming the French government for his own messed up actions. Classic cult leader. And the OTS left behind a whole bunch of documents that they called the Testament, and it was basically a collection of writings justifying their actions and describing the events leading up to the transit. And they even pointed out some of the members they considered traitors who were supposedly executed as part of the group's final act. So basically, anybody that refused to be killed at the end of it got killed anyway, because that's just how cults go. So the world is watching at this point, waiting to see what the remaining OTS members might do next. And they would not be disappointed, because there would come another transit. So over the next 3 years, the body count would continue to rise in a series of events that left investigators baffled and the public just horrified. On December 23, 1995, just over a year after the first transit, police made a grim discovery in the Vercors mountains near Grenoble, France, where 16 more bodies, including 3 children, were found in a remote. And this wasn't some random tragedy. It bore the hallmarks of another OTS transit, and the victims had been shot twice before their bodies were set on fire, which sounds familiar to the first transit. And the killings were orchestrated by Christian Bolt, a Swiss psychotherapist who'd taken over the European branch of the OTS after DM Ambro's death. And she wasn't working alone. So 2 of her accomplices were Jean-Pierre Lard and Chetan Patrick Roste-Ing, who were active duty of the French police. So investigators found that many of the victims had taken sedatives before being killed. It's like they were trying to make the death as comfortable as possible for the victims. How thoughtful. But why did these people agree to die? Well, according to witness accounts collected by the Swiss and French police, some remaining OTS members had expressed regret for not participating in the earlier transit, and they were actually jealous of the dead. The final transit and legacy. And just when authorities thought they'd seen the last of the OTS, they would strike again. On March 22, 1997, 5 more bodies were discovered in Saint Casimir, Quebec. And this time, the victims included for OTS followers and the parent of one of the members. And the Quebec police reported that there was no evidence of violence or poisoning in this incident, although the victims had consumed significant doses of tranquilizers, and one victim was suffocated with a plastic bag, a method seen in the 1990 for transit. And the police would find a letter explaining that their actions were intended to ensure a path to the new world, because apparently the only way to reach the new world was through a cocktail of drugs and self-inflicted death. But in a bizarre twist, the children of one couple involved in this final incident were allowed to choose whether to participate in the suicide, And thankfully, they chose to live. And while that was the final event of the Solar Temple, and it's supposedly gone at this point, its shadow still looms large, and the OTS tragedies didn't end with those 74 deaths. They sparked a chain reaction that's still unfolding today. After the smoke cleared, investigators and conspiracy theorists had a field day, obviously. And some people just couldn't believe that successful, professional people would be willing to off themselves on a cosmic road trip, so they came up with all sorts of wild theories. Maybe it was a government plot, or the Illuminati, or aliens, which, all fair to be honest. And this just lit a fire under the public and the anti-cult movement in Europe specifically, which basically just amped up investigations into cults. Suddenly, every new religious group was under the microscope. France and Belgium went full paranoia mode, and they started side-eyeing all kinds of minority religions. Even peaceful groups got accused of being potentially violent or planning mass suicides like the Order of the Solar Temple. But that's pretty much it for the Order of the Solar Temple. I mean, it's a somber reminder of how far people will go in search of meaning. 74 people's lives were lost, and this. Kevin's pissed about it too. I don't know if you heard him growl. It's just crazy to me how one person or two people can create this religion and convince people to take their own lives. It's just horribly sad, but also, incredibly fascinating. We're just people and we're all flawed and we all want to search for what we're here for and where we're going. But this one is very, very, very unfortunate. But that is it for today. If you did enjoy this video or learn something from this video, go ahead and give the video a like. If you have any suggestions for me, let me know down below. I always love reading the comments and I take a lot of your suggestions and make them into deep dive videos. And until then, I will see your beautiful face in the next video. Okay, bye-bye. In 2020, a college student named Derek Schubert was scrolling through cold case files when he stumbled upon a story of a 9-year-old girl who had been murdered in 1964. What he discovered would not only change his life, but would finally bring closure to a family that had been waiting 56 years for answers. This is a story of how a 20-year-old genealogy enthusiast accomplished what generations of seasoned investigators couldn't, solving one of Pennsylvania's oldest cold cases. Crime, conspiracy, cults, serial killers, and murder, all things that I love to consume, and I know you do too, you sick, twisted, beautiful, intellectually minded. Sounded like a haunted mosquito, didn't it? Anyway, today we are talking about a crazy case that I came across. It is absolutely mind-blowing. So without further ado, let's unbuckle our seatbelts, go Mach 5 down the highway, slam on the brakes, and bust through this windshield into this solved cold case together. Morris and Shivrella entered the world on Thanksgiving Day, November 25th, 1954, in Waterloo, New York. Born to Carmen and Mary Shivrella, she was the second of 5 children who would grow up to embody the tight-knit values of a working-class Italian American family. Her father, Carmen, originally from Wilkes-Barre, had met her mother, Mary, a Hazleton native, and after spending a few years in New York, the family made the decision to return to Mary's hometown. Hazleton, Pennsylvania, in the early 1960s was a community still deeply rooted in its coal mining heritage. The city sat in the heart of the anthracite region, where generations of families had built their lives around the rhythms of the mines. And though the industry was beginning its decline, the culture still remained, a place where families knew their neighbors, where children walked to school without any sort of fear, and where the Catholic Church served as a backbone of community life. So the Shivrella family settled into the northwest section of Hazleton, where Carmen operated the Little Market, a neighborhood grocery store that sat right next to their home. It was very demanding work, and Carmen would rise early to pick up supplies, tend to customers from 0 a.m. to 0 p.m., 7 days a week, and handle the bookkeeping late into the night. Meanwhile, Mary worked at one of the downtown knitting mills, contributing to the family's income and an economy that was slowly transitioning away from its industrial roots. But despite the long hours that their parents worked, the Shivrella children experienced a childhood rich with love and tradition. Sundays were sacred in their household, as Carmen would close the store for exactly 1 hour around lunchtime, and Mary would prepare a special meal, the only time during the week when the entire family could sit together around the table. So Sunday mornings began at Mass at either St. Joseph's or Most Precious Blood Church, reinforcing the deep Catholic faith that guided their family values. And for little Morris, faith wasn't just a family obligation. It was a calling to her. The little girl with the bright blue eyes and dark hair was known for her gentle soul and caring nature, and she would often tell family that she wanted to become a nun when she grew up, a dream that seemed to fit perfectly with her character. She was the type of child that just put others before herself. She was extremely selfless, and who found joy in just simple pleasures like playing school with her siblings or tinkering on an organ her parents had bought her at Sears. In the evening, Morris would sit at the organ composing songs with her big brother Ron, and their voices just filled the house with music. She would also share a bedroom with her younger sister Carmen Marie, and the two girls would brush each other's hair at night while looking up at the heartthrobs David Cassidy and Ricky Nelson, whose photographs covered their walls. So it was an innocent time when a little girl's biggest concerns were learning to play the organ and helping her family. The family's daily routine was predictable and comforting. Carmen would be at the store before dawn, preparing for another long day of serving their neighbors. Mary would head to the knitting mill, working alongside other women who formed the backbone of Hazelton's changing economy. And the children would walk to St. Joseph's parochial school, where nuns in traditional habits provided education infused with Catholic values. It was a community where everyone knew everyone, where children were safe once again, and where the most shocking news might be about someone's garden not producing tomatoes or the latest church fundraiser. It was a very peaceful community until it wasn't, because beneath this veneer of small-town safety, darkness was lurking. In 1964, the concept of stranger danger barely existed, and children walked alone to school, played outside and supervised, and parents felt secure in their tight-knit communities. The innocence of that era, which allowed children like Morris to roam freely, would soon be shattered by an act of evil that would change not just one family, but an entire community's understanding of safety. So Wednesday, March 18th, 1964, began like any other day in the Shivrella household. At 4:00 a.m., the alarm clock shattered the early morning silence, and Morris would roll over in the bed she shared with her sister Carmen Marie, whispering, quote, "Close your eyes, do one," which was her nickname that she gave her little sister. She also said, "I'm going to turn on the light to get my clothes." It was just this small act of consideration that would become one of Carmen Marie's most precious memories. Meanwhile, Morris would carefully select her outfit for the day, a dark jacket and skirt with black leotards under multicolored scarf. She would put on her earrings, slip her silver ring with a small diamond onto her finger, and fasten her yellow gold necklace with this 1-inch cross around her neck. As she prepared to leave for school, Morris had a special mission that morning. As her teacher, one of the nuns at St. Joseph's parochial school, was celebrating a feast day, Morris wanted to honor her with a gift. Again, she's just so selfless and sweet and caring. She would carefully select 2 cans of fruit from her father's grocery store, a gesture that perfectly captured her thoughtful nature. But this act of kindness would change everything, because instead of walking to school with her siblings as she normally did, Morris decided to leave early so she could drop off the canned goods at her classroom before attending daily mass. It was an uncharacteristic decision for a girl who typically enjoyed the company of her brothers and sisters on their 6-block walk to school. So, at approximately 8:00 a.m., Morris stepped out of her family's home and began walking alone down the familiar streets of Hazelton. She told Carmen Marie she loved her as she walked down the steps and turned off the light. Carmen Marie, still sleepy, told her sister she loved her too. But neither girl could have ever imagined these would be their final words to each other. The route to St. Joseph's parochial school was one Morris had walked countless times, 6 blocks through the northwest section of Hazelton, past houses where she knew the families and along the streets where neighbors would wave and say good morning. The early March air was crisp, and she pulled her windbreaker close as she walked, the 2 cans of fruit secured in her school bag. But what would happen next would remain a mystery for nearly 6 decades. 'Cause somewhere along those 6 familiar blocks between her house and the school where she was expected to arrive for daily mass, Morris encountered someone who would change her life and end it forever. So at school, the nuns noticed when Morris didn't arrive for daily mass. It was unlike her to miss such an important part of her day, especially when she specifically mentioned wanting to give her teacher the canned goods. So when lunchtime came and went without Morris returning home, her absence became impossible to ignore. Carmen, her father, was at the grocery store serving customers, and her mother Mary was at the knitting mill working, and the other Shivrella children were at school, unaware that their sister was missing. So it was just a normal day at Hazleton with people going about their normal routines, completely unaware that evil had visited their quiet community. So when the school contacted the family about Morris's absence, concern quickly turned to alarm, because this wasn't like Morris. She was responsible, devout, and reliable. She didn't run away or skip school. She was the type of child who followed rules and honored commitments. So the realization that something was terribly wrong began to settle over the family like a dark cloud. Carmen closed the store and began searching around the St. Joseph Church area, desperately hoping to find some sign of his daughter. Police were contacted, and the search would begin through the streets of Hazleton. Neighbors would join in, understanding that when a child goes missing in a small community, everyone becomes part of the effort to bring them home. But as the afternoon wore on and no trace of Morris was found, a terrible truth was about to be discovered. Because a little girl who had left home that morning with such love in her heart and kindness in her intentions would never be coming home again. Because about 2 to 3 miles south of Hazleton, in a section of Hazel Township known as Millville, an entirely different kind of routine was taking place. A man decided to give a 16-year-old nephew driving lessons, choosing the quiet back roads where a nervous teenager could practice without the pressure of heavy traffic. The area they selected was far from picturesque because the landscape was scarred by decades of coal mining, dotted with strip mines that had been abandoned when the coal was exhausted. So these defunct mining pits had become informal dumping grounds where locals would dispose of garbage. So it was essentially just a giant garbage dump. It was just after 1:00 p.m. when the uncle and nephew were making their way along those back roads. The teenager was concentrating on his driving, hands gripping the wheel as he navigated the unfamiliar terrain. But that's when something caught their attention in one of the old strip mining pits. At first glance, it looked like a large doll had been discarded among the refuse. The splash of blue fabric against the dark earth seemed almost innocent, perhaps a child's toy that had been thrown away. But as they looked more closely, the horrible truth became clear. This wasn't a doll at all. The man immediately stopped the car and approached the pit with growing dread. And what he discovered would haunt him for the rest of his life. Because there, among the garbage and debris that filled the abandoned coal stripping pit, lay the body of a small child. And the child would be a deceased Morris. The scene was horrific. Morris's body was still warm to the touch when they went to check on her, indicating that she had been killed only hours before, if not sooner. She had been bound and gagged and also physically assayed, and the cause of death looked to be that she was asphyxiated with her own shoelaces. You think the more I do these it gets like easier to read down this time. It just really doesn't. It just breaks my fucking heart. And those 2 cans of fruit she had selected so carefully for her to eat were found right beside her body. Just a heartbreaking reminder of the innocent mission that had led to her death. The discovery was immediately reported to police, who arrived at the scene within minutes. The strip mining pit located in the Millville section of Hazel Township became a crime scene unlike anything the local authorities had ever encountered. This wasn't just a murder. It was an act of unspeakable evil committed against a child whose only crime had been her desire to honor her teacher with a simple gift. Word of the discovery spread quickly through Hazleton. In a community where everyone knew everyone else, news traveled very fast. Carmen Shivrella was still searching around St. Joseph's Church when a passerby, unaware of the devastating news they were delivering, casually mentioned that they had found, quote, the Shivrella girl dead. I just can't even imagine a mother or a father hearing in a conversation off to the side that their child is gone. It's just all so hard to comprehend. The words would hit Carmen like a physical blow. The father, who had been desperately hoping to find his daughter safe, was now facing every parent's worst nightmare. The little girl who had kissed him goodbye that morning, who had been looking forward to giving her each a gift, was never coming home. And back at the knitting mill, Mary Chivrella was experiencing something that could only be described as a mother's intuition. Even before she received the devastating news, she was overcome with a horrible sense of anxiety. Something was wrong, terribly, terribly wrong, and she knew it in her bones before anyone even said anything to her. So the discovery of Morris's body didn't just end one family's agonizing search. It just shattered the innocence of the entire community. Hazleton in 1964 was a place where children could play outside, you could leave your doors unlocked, and where the most serious crimes were minor thefts and domestic disputes. But now, it held the brutal murder of a 9-year-old girl. It was just incomprehensible to everyone around. So as news of the discovery spread throughout the town, parents began calling their children home early from school as the unthinkable had happened. A child had been murdered in their safe, quiet community. The streets that had seemed so familiar and secure just hours before now felt different and dangerous and filled with shadows and possibilities that no one had previously imagined. So the initial investigation was thorough and immediate. Pennsylvania State Police descended on the scene with every available resource, understanding that in cases involving child murder, the first 48 hours are crucial. So they carefully documented the crime scene and collected evidence and began the painstaking process of trying to understand what had happened to Morris. The evidence was both extensive and haunting because the killer had been careless, leaving behind crucial clues that would prove important decades later. DNA evidence was collected from Morris's clothing, and that key evidence was semen stains and pubic hair that were found on Morris's clothing. Just so fucking disgusting and vile. But in 1964, DNA analysis were still decades away from being invented, so these pieces of evidence were carefully preserved without anyone understanding their future significance. The investigation expanded rapidly throughout Hazleton and the surrounding area. The police interviewed hundreds of people, following up on every single lead, every suggestion, and every possibility. They would speak to neighbors, they would speak to teachers, they would speak to store owners, and just anyone who might have seen Morris on her final walk to school, and the community response was overwhelming. Everyone wanted to help find the monster who had killed an innocent child. State Police Corporal Mark Barron would say, quote, "What happened to her ushered in a change in this community. Whether you like it or not, the way you live changed after March 18th of 1964 in Hazleton." For the Chivrella family, the investigation represented both hope and just pure torture, because it was hope that the killer would be found and brought to justice, but torture in having to relive the details of their daughter's murder over and over again. Each interview, each lead, each development forced them to confront the horrible reality of what happened to their little girl. And Carmen and Mary Chivrella handled the tragedy with remarkable strength, though their pain was evident to everyone who knew them. They would cooperate fully with the investigation, providing any information that might help catch their daughter's killer. But they also just had to continue living, which I can't even imagine, just going about your day after something like this happened. But they needed to work and support the rest of their family, because they still had for surviving children to take care of, for children who were struggling to understand why their sister had been taken from them. The investigation revealed several disturbing details about the crime. First, the killer had likely been familiar with the area, knowing about the abandoned strip mining pit where he could dispose of Morris's body. The location suggested someone who understood the local geography, who knew where to go to avoid any sort of detection. So this led investigators to focus on local residents rather than transients or outsiders. But despite months of intensive investigation, leads began to dry up. The Pennsylvania State Police interviewed hundreds of people, followed every possible clue, and pursued every theory. Suspects were developed and questioned, but none proved to be the killer. So, the case that had seemed so promising in the beginning with physical evidence and witness accounts began to go stagnant. The investigation consumed enormous resources, and more than 230 members of the Pennsylvania State Police worked on the case at various times, making it one of the largest investigations in the department's history. Detective Thomas McAndrew, who would work on the case for 26 years, became particularly invested in finding Morris's killer. But despite his dedication and the dedication of countless other investigators, the case remained unsolved. And as months turned into years, the investigation evolved from active case to cold case. But the Pennsylvania State Police never gave up, and the case was reviewed annually with new investigators bringing fresh perspectives to evidence, and new technologies were applied as they became available. And the case file grew thicker with each passing year. But the impact on the community was lasting. Hazleton residents never forgot about Morris Shivrella, or the monster who had killed her. The case became part of the town's identity, a tragic chapter that reminded everyone of the day their community lost its innocence. And parents would continue to worry about their children's safety, and the murder remained a topic of conversation decades later. But sometimes the most difficult cases require unconventional solutions. And in 2020, a completely different kind of investigator would take an interest in the Morris Shivrella case, someone who would approach it from an entirely new angle using techniques that didn't even exist when the crime was committed. So Eric Schubert was just 18 years old when he first learned about the Morris Shivrella case, but he was already developing a reputation as something of a prodigy in the emerging field of genetic genealogy. A history major at Elizabethtown College in Pennsylvania, Schubert had been fascinated by genealogy since childhood, spending countless hours tracing family trees and learning about the complex relationships that connect all of us to our past. I was playing with my Tamagotchi, whereas this guy was literally making history as an early teen. Just extremely impressive. And what made Schubert unusual wasn't just his passion for genealogy. It was his understanding of how modern DNA technology could be combined with traditional genealogy research to solve crime. And by the time he was in college, he had already helped other police agencies crack cold cases using genetic genealogy, a technique that blends DNA testing with family tree research to identify suspects and victims, which is crazy. This guy is insanely impressive at such a young age. So Schubert had spent years developing his skills in what was then a relatively new field, and he was the proprietor of S-Genealogy, his own research business, and had earned a reputation for being able to solve complex genealogy puzzles that stumped most experienced researchers. And in 2020, Schubert was looking for a new case to work on when he came across the story of Morris Shivrella. And the case immediately captured his attention, not just because of the tragic circumstances, but because he recognized that it might be solvable using the genetic genealogy techniques he had been perfecting. Because the case had that physical evidence and also DNA profiles and had been carefully preserved by investigators who understood its importance. It's so rare that we hear about old cases where they actually preserve the evidence. It's just so incredibly lucky and so good on part of the Pennsylvania State Police that they did that. It's just so incredible of them. But Schubert still faced a significant challenge because the Pennsylvania State Police, though very thorough with keeping evidence, were not fans of working with people outside of the police. They weren't fans of working with consultants, especially young college students with no formal law enforcement training, because the idea of allowing a teenager to work on one of their most important cold cases seemed unlikely at best. However, Schubert had something that impressed the investigators, a track record of success. His work on the other cold cases had demonstrated that genetic genealogy could solve cases that had stymied traditional investigators for decades. So when he approached the Pennsylvania State Police about working on the Shivrella case, they were surprised but willing to listen. Again, just 2 thumbs up to the Pennsylvania State Police. So the inevitable decision to work with Schubert represented a significant leap of faith for the Pennsylvania State Police, because they had been working on the case for over 50 years, applying every available technique and resource. So the idea that a college student might succeed where seasoned investigators had failed seemed almost impossible. So they were like, go for it, kid. Why not? Because they were also aware that genetic genealogy was producing remarkable results in other jurisdictions, and they were willing to try anything that might finally solve their oldest cold case. So the partnership between Schubert and the Pennsylvania State Police began in 2020 at a time when the technique of genetic genealogy was still relatively new, like we talked about, but was beginning to produce impressive results across the country, such as the Golden State Killer case in California, which I covered, Dwayne, which is right here if you want to go watch that. It's like multiple killers who were caught decades later. It's a very, very cool video. But the Golden State Killer case just showed that even decade-old cases could be solved by combining DNA evidence with genealogical research. And just for a little refresher, the Golden State Killer basically wanted to figure out like who his great-great-grandma was. And in doing, they got caught as the Golden State Killer. So it's a little freaky, all that stuff, but also clearly awesome for catching horrible criminals. But again, I have a more in-depth video if you want to go look into that. So Schubert's approach to the Chivrella case was methodical and patient, and he began by uploading the DNA profile from the crime scene to public genealogy databases looking for distant relatives of the killer. The process required extraordinary patience and skill, as he had to work backward from distant cousins to identify potential suspects who might have committed the crime. So the work was painstaking and often frustrating because genetic genealogy requires researchers to build extensive family trees, often going back several generations to find common ancestors. And then they must work forward through multiple family lines, identifying all the descendants who might be connected to the DNA evidence. So it's a lot of like what ifs and might tests and all this kind of stuff. It's very, very tedious. It's detective work that requires both scientific precision and genealogical intuition. So for Schubert, the Chivrella case became an obsession, and he would spend countless hours building family trees, analyzing DNA matches, and trying to identify potential suspects. And the work was emotionally demanding as well as intellectually challenging because he was dealing with the most serious crime imaginable, the murder of a child. And he felt the weight of the responsibility to the family and to the community. And Schubert would later explain, quote, "The investigation that went into all this work was probably the hardest genealogy task that I've ever faced," continuing, "This was probably the hardest thing that I've ever done in my entire life, and it means so much to me that I was able to be on the team that could provide answers to the Chivrella family." So the young genealogist's dedication to the case was remarkable, and he would work side by side with the Pennsylvania State Police investigators, combining his expertise in genealogy with their knowledge of the case details. And it was just a collaboration that represented the best of both traditional investigation techniques and cutting-edge forensic science, cause when we work together, we make great things happen. So Schubert worked through the complex family trees, and DNA matches began to narrow down the possibilities. And the process was like solving a massive puzzle, with each piece of information bringing him closer to identifying the killer. And at a certain point, he began to feel confident that he was on the right track, saying, quote, "I knew we were going to find the assailant." So in 2020, after months of careful research, Schubert identified a distant cousin of the perpetrator in the genealogy database. And this was the crucial breakthrough that would eventually lead to solving the case. Because from this distant cousin, Schubert began building an extensive family tree, or building it out more, mapping out all the possible descendants who might be connected to the DNA evidence found at the crime scene. And the investigation kind of became a race against time in a different sense, because many potential suspects were elderly or had already died, making it difficult to collect DNA samples for comparison. So the passage of time that made the case so difficult to solve was also working against the investigators as they tried to verify their findings. But as Schubert's research progressed, one name began to emerge as the most likely suspect, James Paul Forte. Born in 1941, Forte was a bartender and a bar supply salesman who lived in Hazleton his entire life. And he had been 22 years old at the time of Morris's murder and lived just 6 or 7 blocks from the Chivrella family home. And the genealogical evidence was compelling, but it needed to be verified through traditional DNA testing. And there was one significant problem. James Paul Forte had died in 1980, 42 years before the case was solved. He had suffered a heart attack at the age of 38 while working at a bar where he was taught. So the investigators faced a crucial decision. To definitively prove that Forte was the killer, they would need to obtain a DNA sample from his remains. and this would require exhuming his body, a dramatic and expensive step that needed to be justified by the strength of evidence. But the case for exhumation was very strong, and Schubert's genealogical research had identified Forte as the most likely suspect, and traditional investigative techniques had confirmed that he had been in the right place at the right time. And additionally, investigators discovered that Forte had a history of violent sexual behavior that made him a plausible suspect for such crime. Because in 1974, Forte had been arrested on charges of rape and assault, but he had been given a plea deal for the less serious conviction of aggravated assault and was sentenced to 1 year of probation. And in 1978, he was arrested again on charges of reckless endangerment and harassment. So this pattern of behavior suggested someone capable of escalating to much more serious crimes, like taking advantage of unmurdering a child. So the decision to exhume Forte's body was approved in early 2022, nearly 58 years after Morris's murder. And the exhumation took place under carefully controlled conditions, with investigators collecting tissue samples that could be used for DNA analysis. The process was both expensive and emotionally challenging for everyone involved, but it represented the best chance of finally solving this cold case. So the DNA analysis took several weeks to complete, and investigators had to extract usable DNA from tissue samples that were more than 40 years old, then compared to DNA evidence from that crime scene, which was 58 years previous. So the process required sophisticated forensic techniques and careful analysis to ensure accurate results. So on February 3rd, 2022, the results would come back, and the DNA from James Paul Forte's remains was a perfect match to the DNA evidence from Morris Chivrella's murder. So after nearly 58 years, the case had finally been solved. And this breakthrough just represented a remarkable achievement for both traditional investigative techniques and the cutting-edge forensic science techniques. Because the Pennsylvania State Police had preserved the evidence for decades, ensuring that when the technology became available, the case could be solved. Just an absolute win for police. And Derek Schubert had provided the genealogical expertise that made the identification possible. And the combination of both approaches had finally brought justice to Morris Chivrella and her entire family. So on February 10th, 2022, nearly 58 years after Morris Chivrella's murder, Pennsylvania State Police held a press conference that would finally provide answers to one of the state's oldest cold cases. And the room was packed with current and retired investigators and members of the Chivrella family and members of the media who had followed the case for decades. And State Police Corporal Mark Barron, who had become the lead investigator on the case, stood at the podium with obvious emotion, cause this was a day that many people had thought would never come. And he would say, quote, "Today we can finally say that we know who killed Morris Chivrella. And through the combined efforts of traditional investigation and cutting-edge genetic genealogy, we have identified James Paul Forte as the person responsible for this horrific crime." And the announcement was met with a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that the case had finally been solved, but sadness that it had taken so long and that the perpetrator had already died and couldn't be held accountable for his actions. But at least we can hopefully assume he's rotting in hell. And the press conference provided details about James that painted a picture of a man who had been hiding in plain sight for nearly 2 decades after the murder. Born in 1941, James had been a 22-year-old bartender living just blocks away from the Chivrella household when he killed Morris Stold. And he had no known connection to the family, making his selection of Morris appear to be a crime of opportunity rather than a targeted attack. And he also had the history of sexual violence and criminal charges as well, as we spoke about. But perhaps the most disturbing was the realization that Forte had lived in Hazleton for 16 years after murdering Morris, continuing to work as a bartender and interact with community members who had no idea they were dealing with a child killer. And he had attended the same churches, shopped at the same stores, and lived in the same neighborhoods as the family he had devastated. And for the Chivrella family, the announcement brought a complex mix of emotions. And the 4 surviving siblings, Ron, Barry, Carmen Marie, and David, were present at the press conference, representing a family that had waited their entire adult lives for this moment. And Ron would say, quote, "that we know the individual, it gives us a sense of closure. and continuing to say, no full closure. We'll never have that, but a sense of closure that we know the individual that did it, and that the individual isn't out committing the same crime and hurting other young girls like Maris. Carmen Marie, Maris's sister, spoke emotionally about the impact of the case on their family, saying, quote, "We have so many precious memories of Maris. At the same time, our family will always feel the emptiness and sorrow of her absence. We will continue to ask ourselves what would have been, what could have been, what could have been." But the family's response to the news was remarkable in its lack of hatred or desire for revenge. And their parents, Carmen and Mary Shivrella, had raised their children to focus on love and forgiveness rather than anger and retribution. As even in the face of such tragedy, the family had maintained their faith and their commitment to justice rather than vengeance. Iran would say, it's never been about the hatred, it's never been about punishment or revenge, only justice. But the responses just demonstrated a remarkable strength of character that honored Maris's memory. And the press conference also highlighted the crucial role that Eric Schubert had played in solving the case. Because the young genealogist, now 20 years old, was recognized for his extraordinary contribution to the investigation, and his work had accomplished what generations of experienced investigators had been unable to achieve, saying, quote, "Eric's work was instrumental in solving the case. His expertise in genetic genealogy, combined with his dedication and persistence, made it possible to identify James Paul Forte as the perpetrator. This case could not have been solved without his contributions," which I just think is so incredibly amazing for somebody to just see a case and be so dedicated to it, quite literally getting nothing in return besides the fact that he brought peace to a family injustice. So that is Maris's case and Derek Schubert and everybody involved. Absolutely an incredible job, but an